happy to be here to, to discuss the bill today, because it creates the issue that the Senate and the rest of the legislature has come to review and to see this as an important issue. It is a critically important issue to the patients in the state who have come to rely on medical marijuana. The story that was told earlier is illustrative. I would just very quickly give you another illustration. I represent the dispensaries in Ann Arbor who are operating under the Ann Arbor licensing regulation. And one of our caregivers was approached by a family whose 3-year-old daughter was suffering over 50 epileptic seizures a week. And to the issue of testing, the usual modality is to use some cannabis oils, which are now forbidden by Carruthers. But and even with the oils, when they tested it, they didn't work on the little girl, and they didn't have the efficacy that they hoped for. So they, by themselves, came upon a method of juicing cannabis, which is to compress the juices out of fresh cannabis. And believe it or not, in a period of weeks, the girl's seizures diminished, and they've now, I believe, disappeared. I'm sure that the committee members have seen Sanjay Gupta's retreat from his previous positions against medical marijuana that was shown on CNN. And that is a similar case, and goes to the senator's concern with regard to testing the CBD strains. Before the cannabis laws were passed in all the states where they've been passed, there was hardly any research done on CBDs, the CBD cannabinoids in cannabis. And that has shown itself to have tremendous promise, particularly for children, and also as well for cancer patients and all the problems associated with chemotherapy. But the point is that all of that experimentation is going on now to caregivers and patients and people like you heard testify today who experimented by themselves without any help, without any direction, and without any guidance. And in fact, Michigan is, and we're proud to have done it, Michigan has developed strains that have helped a wide variety of conditions and illnesses and help people both palliatively and curatively in terms of their treatment of their particular condition. This should be encouraged. I believe that this bill would implicitly discourage that kind of experimentation. Prairie Plant Systems, as has been testified, grows one particular strain of marijuana. There are over 3,000 strains before the laws were passed of cannabis. And we literally know little or nothing about this because the federal government has actively and aggressively discouraged any clinical research and any attempts to do it. And I'm always surprised that millions of dollars are spent on non-approved treatment uses of pharmaceuticals, but nothing gets done at the federal level about attempting to regulate those non-approved uses. And you just heard stories today about J&J, Johnson & Johnson paying $1 billion for a non-approved use of a particular Resperdal, I think is the name of the drug. But that's, the debate is literally beginning, and the discoveries are literally beginning. And in the 4 or 5 years that this has been the law, there have been tremendous progress in steps in finding out what works for whom, what works under what conditions, what modalities are appropriate and necessary for particular patients. One of the very, very promising areas that I don't think this bill addresses at all, and I think should be central to the legislative concern, is how does this work for the patients? And if we have some focus on the patients that is not reflected, I believe, in this bill, that will do more to help the patients and to help their caregivers prepare the medicine that they do under a variety of conditions. With regard to the testing, nobody is generally more interested in producing high-quality medical-grade marijuana than the caregivers. Not only do these people, like a country doctor, they know their patients. They deal with them on a regular and consistent basis. They get the feedback, and they're the people that will ultimately be the ones who develop the strains that will be the most efficacious for whatever the particular condition is. In addition to that, one of the questions it might address with this kind of an industrial approach to the production of marijuana is that of the 25,000 plus caregivers that there are in the state, there is no particular shortage of marijuana. In fact, there's been not an explosion, but there's been a tremendous growth in the varieties of marijuana that are available, and the patients themselves are treating themselves, are experimenting on themselves to find out what works for them. You've heard the testimony of someone, of the prior witness, indicate the importance of doing this on their own. There's no particular way, and there's no particular government program that I think you could design that would have the same impact as the patients figuring out for themselves, because nobody has given them any opportunity or any information about how they might do something themselves. You've heard testimony from our labs who have done a tremendous job in educating people, caregivers, and patients about testing, and a bunch of testing is being done now. More needs to be done. Better, it's difficult to keep records when the seizure of those records can result in a federal prosecution. But that risk is being assumed by all these people who are doing the testing. And this is done voluntarily. It's not compelled by any legislation, and it will continue to be. You should, particularly as Republican legislators, you should be proud of the fact that the free market has done a tremendous amount to advance the interests of the patients and the caregivers. Yeah. And the patients have been the beneficiaries of this. And the patients have by their behavior, demanded and received better treatment because of their input. Not many patients really have an input with the pharmaceutical company, and a lot of patients are treated with some disdain by their physicians because of their request to use medical marijuana. This kind of testing is currently being done and will not necessarily be advanced by this bill, and which is the reason we fundamentally oppose it, is that you're replacing something that's already beginning to work well and will work better without any government input. I was trying to think when I saw the bill last night, and there's a third draft. I haven't seen it yet, but when I saw the second draft last night, my first thought was, I've heard of the fox in the chicken coop, but I've never heard of the fox selling a chicken coop. And that's what you have in this circumstance, is the fox of Prairie Plant Systems is selling us a chicken coop that we don't need, and it is not helpful for patients. I don't think despite the noble presentations, is not really in the patient's interest. And I think that whether or not it's in the patient's interest ought to be determined by the patients. And the patients here, and their families, and their friends, and their caregivers have already voted. We've made it very clear what the position of the people is in the state, and I think that should be honored and considered and treated with the respect that it's earned. And finally, the really critical thing done by the Medical Marijuana Act and by other medical marijuana acts in other states is that it is the crucial involvement of the patient with their caregivers. And in this particular case, the patients know and have figured out by themselves, without help from anybody but their caregivers or their friends, what's best for them. And they have by their behavior indicated that they support the system, and in fact, the Provisioning Center Bill, House Bill 4271, advances the patient's interest and the caregiver's interest in producing medical grade marijuana and having it tested and having it available for the patients at in free market competitive costs. That was moving forward slowly and gradually, building speed and momentum. And I think the committee should do something that would advance that momentum and not retard it. We think this bill would retard it, and we think it won't help anybody with Prairie Plant Systems. Thank you. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Haynes?